All right, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I have some visitors under my desk. All right, here we are. And Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Visitors on my desk too. This will not be the typical live stream that we do on Shabbat. If you subscribe to our newsletter, then I explained a little bit about that in the newsletter. I called it I think the Shabbat recliner, or yeah. But explain, we have had so many things going on in the month of July that it's impossible to catch up, much less pass yourself. And so with everything that's been going on this month, and then we've got Revive next weekend. And so, by the way, there will not be this live stream next Shabbat, but you can tune in to the Revive live stream and you can catch those services. Excuse me. You can catch those services Friday and Saturday. So I believe I'm speaking Friday and then teaching the Torah portion on Shabbat next Saturday. So if you'll connect with Public Roots Network or Revive, then I don't think it's like a continuous live stream, but I think they're live streaming a lot of the praise and the worship. Typically, that's what they do. And of course, the messages that are brought forth. So we'll be here, we just won't be here. And so there won't be a newsletter next week. There won't be this live stream next week, but B'ezrat Hashem, the week after, we should be back on track. And then we'll have a couple more weeks, and then we'll be going to Women of Valor. And probably the same situation there. There probably won't be a newsletter or a live stream that week. But there's still room at both conferences. If you haven't registered for Revive, remember, you can always just walk in and register when you arrive. That's possible. Even after the tickets close, you can still walk in and register the days of. And there's still room at Women of Valor. And so if you need something to kind of get you ready for the fall feasts, to get you excited, motivated, and basically just to renew those old acquaintances or make some new ones. Never a bad thing. Just to go somewhere by yourself, and that forces you to meet new people, and hopefully you'll make some lifelong friends. And as we build this support system in a very difficult time, the more you have of like kind and like mind, I think, the better. Okay. So, like I said, what we're going to do today is a little bit different. Normally, I have a composed message to bring to you, but today I'd like to follow up a little bit with what goes on in our newsletter, the email newsletter. Now, what we don't want is for someone to sign up for the newsletter that's not really interested. But for those who are interested in the creation gospel, you say, well, what is the creation gospel? It's a combination of things. In the end, that combination of things is put together with a view toward funding primarily the orphanage in Kenya called Lamala Children's Center. And also, as we are able, we try to help Hadassah Orphanage in India. And there's another orphanage in Rwanda. And sometimes we're not the primary contributor, but ministries who trust us to help those funds reach a particular orphanage, they might partner with us. And so sometimes we might raise money, say, to buy new kitchen utensils in India, or completely rebuild, the compound in Rwanda after the first one was destroyed by a pretty bad storm. And so the books, the workbooks, the Creation Gospel workbooks, if, say, I go speak and somebody gives me an honorarium, those things go in to the Creation Gospel account, and then they're transferred. That goes toward the upkeep of the orphanage. We've got pretty good coverage right now on the basic necessities, but if you have been reading our newsletter, we've also had a lot of building projects among those 3 orphanages over the last year or so. And so we feel like we have them on a better footing in terms of housing and basic services, greenhouses to be able to grow food, gardening, and that sort of thing. But there's a few things we're trying to finish up in Lamala. We're trying to finish up their multi-purpose building and then their new administration building and guest house. And so that's what we're trying to do. When you see us selling books, it's that's the point. It's those funds go into that account. And what we found over the years is lots of people were interested in just not necessarily buying a Creation Gospel workbook, but contributing toward that effort. And so when you make those donations, it is under the supervision of our local congregation, which is called the Olive Branch Messianic Congregation. We're one and the same. It's just that Creation Gospel is more of the, I hate to call it a missionary fund, but again, missions, outreach, trying to reach, a little bit farther than our local community. We can deal with our local community, yes, but we've also been blessed by people wanting to give into that effort. And so that's where the money goes. But you'll also notice it's not just that I do the Creation Gospel workbooks and the Becky books. You'll notice in the newsletter, if you subscribe to it, that very often I'll have a book of the week recommendation. Because what I found is I'm a lifelong reader. I had trouble learning to read when I was little. I almost didn't make it into the 2nd grade with my classmates because at the end of the year, I still couldn't read. And I have no idea what the block was, but I ended up, the teacher just set me over in the corner with the best reader in the class. His name was Miguel, and Miguel didn't like girls too much when we were in 1st grade. And so I guess he thought the faster we do this, the better. And so Miguel taught me how to read so I could go to 2nd grade with everybody else. But by the time I hit 2nd grade, once that log jam was moved, I was the best reader in 2nd grade. And I haven't quit reading since. Ever since then, I appreciate it. I think maybe it's one of those things where when you don't have something, or when something is difficult for you, when you can obtain it, or when you can master it, it becomes much more valuable to you than maybe for somebody for whom it was easy. And being an only child, of course, it was really easy to be immersed in books because you don't always have somebody next door to go do things with. So yes, I do love books. I think it's important to know how to read books, especially, how to discern, how to understand fact, fiction, conjecture, entertainment, speculation, and to know when you're being led astray very subtly. Those sorts of skills are important. But you'll notice that I don't always recommend academic books. Now, often I do. For instance, this week, our Zoom classes, our online classes, we've been studying the 24 ornaments of the bride that are listed in Isaiah 3. And there's a real challenge there, of course, because it's in Hebrew. And very often the English translators, they're translating something completely different, like something that it would go on a completely different part of the body. And so we said, well, it's culture changes, and the time at which Isaiah wrote these things, the way that brides dressed for their wedding was much different and the same as we dress today. But you don't see brides today layered down with 24 adornments. And so, yeah, we had to go back into the Hebrew, go back and look at some of the more isolated Jewish cultures. For instance, the Kurds in northern Iraq and Iran, Yemenites, who had less, influence coming from Europe, and they maintained what we would say the older ways. Now, clearly, if we're talking about something 3,000 years ago, they're still not doing it the way that it was done 3,000 years ago. But we can appreciate, as we looked through some of the books and looked at some of the pictures that were taken, say, in the 19th century, all of a sudden we could appreciate those 24 layers of adornment that are mentioned in Isaiah. And so to do that, we went back to some books, a lot of pictures, to help us see. This was one of the books that we used, which is called The Jews of Kurdistan. And in this book, we were able to see some pictures of brides, some of the belts that they wore, which kept coming up, the different kinds of veils that they wore, and even the amulets that Isaiah mentions. There's a lot of controversy about amulets, and it's like the henna. It mentions the henna in the Song of Songs, and henna has come to be associated, I think, with more mystical elements and fertility in modern times. But, the question always is, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And so, yes, modern things we might see as attached to idolatry, magic, sorcery, and things like that. But the question is, when it was originally begun as a symbol or a custom, did it have all that attached to it? For instance, trees are a big thing in the Torah in terms of idolatry, because people would worship poles, trees, signs of fertility, and so forth. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a tree in your yard. It just means that you shouldn't be worshiping the tree in your yard. So you have to exercise a little bit of common sense. And so as it concerns things like the crescent ornaments or the amulets that are mentioned in Isaiah, we have to go back and say, what did they originally mean? Did they have, implications of magic or fertility way back then? What about henna? Even though that's not mentioned in Isaiah, it's mentioned in the Song of Songs. Originally, it's a beautification. And over time, because people are superstitious, human beings are superstitious people, then they can grow to mean something different than what was originally intended, just like a tree. A tree that grew on the third day of creation, the intent was never for it to become an object of worship, but to remind you of the Creator, to worship Him. The bronze serpent in the wilderness, it forced the people to look up at the source of their healing. It wasn't the snake itself. Looking at the snake reminded them to look up to the heavens, to the source of their healing. But over time, the intended use of the snake was perverted, and people began to believe that the snake itself had some power. And so eventually they had to destroy that symbol. It was just so out of hand. But you're not going to be able to destroy every single symbol on earth that has somehow been attached to magic, sorcery, idolatry, because you'd have to destroy the entire earth. Human beings are very creative at attaching dumb stuff to the creation. So you have to exercise common sense when it comes to those things. So it was a great point of discussion. And that's why I say I love books, because often they can give you a description, or in this case, pictures, to help you understand, well, what is the Bible talking about? What did those things look like? Because that's not in my cultural context. You know, I don't wear headdresses with coins and things attached to them. This was a good one. And this one is called Esther's Children. And it's a history of Persian Jews. And again, it shows you in picture form about the culture. Again, helping us to understand the 24 ornaments of the bride, helping us to picture, you know, what a bride in the 18th century might look like in a more Middle Eastern context that we would associate with the Bible, and helping us to visualize, you know, what did they look like back then? All right. And again, as we looked at the 24 ornaments of the bride, one of the challenges I gave the class was there are 8 garments of the Kohen Hagadol. There are 8 garments of the high priest. There are 24 ornaments of the bride. Is it possible that just like we've got 2 commandments that 10 hang on and 611 also hang on? There's 613 total commandments. There's the big 10, the 10 words, and then there's the rest of the commandments, but Yeshua taught us that they all hang on too. You know, the Shema, you know, love Adonai, and 2, love your neighbor. So those 2 things, everything will hang. It's like having you know, 2 hangers in the closet, and then there's 10 hung on those 2, and then the rest of them are hung on those. So we said, okay, let's look at these 24 ornaments and see, would each of these 24 ornaments somehow hang upon the 8 vestments of the high priest? Because if we're a royal priesthood, we're not identical to a Levitical priest, but there are principles and patterns to be learned from the Levitical priesthood that the royal priesthood, that the bride might be able to understand better. So if we understand their clothing and adornments, then it might help us to organize our thinking about our own adornments that we're supposed to be putting on to be in the presence of Adonai Most High. So a great book. This is book day, right? This, many of you have. If you don't, it's a little bit expensive, like Esther's Children. But if you're looking for a coffee table book, right, it's definitely worth the investment. This is called the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, and it's put out by Art Scroll, but it has such great illustrations inside of the high priest's garments and the furniture of the tabernacle. And so because it has such wonderful, beautifully drawn pictures of the high priest garments, I think it helps us to visualize better. Again, as we're talking about the 24 ornaments of the bride, what we have in common with the high priest spiritually, because there's, like I said, related garments, like, you know, here, there's that kind of a woven, kind of a checkered work. There's similar wording used as it pertains to the bride. And so, like, what kind of garment was that associated with? And then we're going to learn what each of the 8 garments symbolized. The atonement, each of those 8 garments stood for some type of atonement. And it didn't mean that by putting on that garment that everything was automatically atoned for. That's not what it meant. It meant if the individual repented sincerely, and it meant if the priest performed his service sincerely and with intention, then those garments would atone. So each of those garments represents a spiritual quality that the high priest needs to have. And of course, each of those spiritual qualities we can also attribute to Yeshua. And if he's our example, that's going to teach us what spiritual qualities we need to help atone for sin in the world. Remember, love covers a multitude of sins. And so we are in places where one high priest can't be. We are in places that Yeshua is not, because he had to go to the Father and he left us in charge. And so in our interactions all over the world, our behavior, our spiritual attributes can help to cover a multitude of sins, to atone for a multitude of sins. We can be ministers of reconciliation. We have to be intentional about it, sincere about it. And the people to whom we teach and preach repentance, they also have to be sincere. But when we put those qualities all together, then atonement and covering is made in the world. And new sins aren't being made. See, the sin won't be there unless we make it. We have to make the sin. But the more we can proclaim the gospel and the transformation of the Spirit, then the fewer sins that are being manufactured each day. We should be having that influence on people. Right? So those are pretty heavy works. Those are pretty heavy books, to recommend. But sometimes in the newsletter, I also recommend children's books, different age groups. If I've had some experience with it, like this one, I think was from last week. It's Gracie and the Story of Noah's Ark. And this is a series. There's 3 of these so far. And Dr. Charlie Brown has designed these, and look, these are great illustrations. And, if you've got some smaller children, I don't see the age group on here, but I would definitely think like pre-reading to maybe first, second grade would be the appropriate age group for this. But I recommend, books at this reading level sometimes. And I just happen to have hers again. It's not that this is, one author I'm recommending, but I just happen to have both of hers. They're on my desk. And this is the workbook to another book that she has put out called It's Not My Weed to Pull. And I think we could all read that and benefit from us, because we spend way too much time weeding other people's gardens. That seems to be a trait that goes on in the Torah community. We have real trouble staying in our own garden, the way the snake had real trouble staying out of Adam and Eve's business. We tend to get way up in other people's business when it's not just their responsibility to pull the weed. We're trying to act in the place sometimes of Adonai's timing. We get out way ahead of him, where he's timing the things that they learn in their lives, just as he's timing the things that we learn in our lives according to, he's tailored it to us. We're each individuals in his eyes. And so he knows, we may need to learn commandment number 583 before we learn commandment number 89. He knows what we need, but often we are trying to correct and judge others according to our own pattern of learning, when their needs are not exactly the same as ours. They'll get there. But this is just the workbook to it, but I'm going to feature it probably within the next couple of newsletters. I'll have the information on there where you can take a gander at that. And it sounds like this would be a great book club book. And I love book club books. Which brings us to one which is not published yet, but we'll be meeting with the publisher, I think the week after Revive. Been exchanging information with them to help them get into the production mode. But so far I have not turned in the final manuscript. I still have the manuscript out with different kinds of editors. And, people see different things. People have different talents. Some people are good at like the big picture when they read a book. Some people are good at grammar and syntax. Some people are really great at just finding typos. You missed a word here, or you've got an extra "the" here. But it does really take a multitude of people to do editing work. And so that's where it is right now. The manuscript is finished, but it's getting all the final fixes. And the challenge of writing and what I've written is fiction. It's a venture into biblical fiction. And it's written at a young adult reading level, which is ages 12 to 18. But what you find out about reading levels out there in the reading world is there's more adults reading young adult literature than there are young adults reading young adult literature. If you look through the reviews on young adult literature, you realize real fast, okay, this is a grown-up. This is not a teenager writing this review. Teenagers typically don't write reviews. If you can get them to read at all, they're not writing reviews on what they read. But I realized there really wasn't much out there for that age group in biblical fiction and biblical historical fiction. In other words, written based in the times of the Bible. I don't know how many of you have read any biblical fiction, but years and years and years ago, I loved reading the Jerusalem Scrolls series by Bodie and Brock Taney. And then they came out with a different set, I believe it was called the AD Chronicles. And it was biblical fiction set during the lifetime of Yeshua. And it was engaging, but it didn't have some of the doctrinal problems that I had with the Left Behind series. I just had to quit reading it because I'm like, oh gosh, people are going to read this fiction and think it's true. And they're going to use it in place of sound biblical doctrine. And so to me, a good historical fiction, it's not necessarily to teach you doctrine. I mean, it should teach good, sound biblical principles, ethics, those sort of things. Stay on track with the history at least. But yeah, there's problems when we're trying to convert to a particular, say, rapture doctrine by using fiction, because many people who won't read the Bible for themselves will read the fiction and think this is the way it's going to go. And then they're going to be hugely disappointed if that's not exactly the way it goes. There's a real lack of maturity that it preys upon. And that's why I say you need to know how to sort through what you're reading. And if it's fiction, make sure it stays in that category. It's fiction. But I ventured into it. And the story is set during the time of King Solomon, or Melech Shlomo. And so that's early Iron Age period. And what I hope to do is to introduce not just the history of that period, biblical history of the period, which is going to be very much influenced by the reign of King David. And then the history that it initiates because of certain things that King Solomon did that weren't that great. He did some great things, but he did a few things that weren't so great. And so the book incorporates some of that in there. Especially you get to see the beginning of the ruptures between the northern and the southern kingdoms. Even though it's still a united monarchy at that time, you can begin to see the cracks in the united monarchy, which were there already. They were there during the time of King David. If you realize how much bad feeling there was, not just between Judah and Benjamin versus the northern tribes, but even this tension between Benjamin and Judah. And so that's good, I think, for kids if they are reading their Bibles, and they should be. A teenager should be reading the Bible through. At the age of 12, you can give them an easy version to read, and they can start reading the Bible through each year. That's when I started, and it was not above my head. All right, now there's still lots of things I didn't understand because I'd never experienced them, but I was able, and it was engaging. And by the time they're 18, there's no reason that they shouldn't be reading at a very adult level of scripture. The story also is set in the south of Israel, and it teaches a lot about the copper mining that King Solomon did in the south, and the iron mining, and how important metallurgy was during the early Iron Age, and how coveted that technology was by other nations, and how they were always trying to steal the secrets of metallurgy so that they could form better weapons of war. Because the better your weapons of war, the more you felt protected and safer from invading armies. Or if you were, you had designs on conquering another nation, if you had the better tools, the better weapons of war, then most likely your warriors would have the advantage. Just like the iron chariots of Sisera, they were a great advantage until Adonai put them onto the soft ground where it didn't work out so well. So, tactics are always going to be important. So yeah, there's a lot about the wildlife of the southern part of Israel, the plants, the caravans that pass through there. And the beauty of it, I think, is that it has the potential to become a series and make an interesting read for teenagers. Because what I found in the literature, like I was saying before, is there's some good literature out there with biblical heroes, but it seems like right now it's dominated by female protagonists. There's a lot of stories out there about Esther and Ruth and Deborah, and the biblical women, because it seems to me like it's either that we've got a lot more women writers of that sort of book, or we've got a lot more female readers of that sort of book. And I suspect both are true, yes and yes. But when I started combing through there, because the publisher always wants to know, well, give me a comparison book. And they actually want 4 comparison books. Because it helps them coach bookstore managers on where to place that book on their shelves. Where does this book belong? Well, as I searched and I searched and I searched, I realized that I'm not finding any books with a teenage boy as a protagonist. It's mostly females, and nothing wrong with that. We need biblical heroes and heroines to identify with, to encourage us, but there just didn't seem to be much in there, at least contemporary, that had a young male protagonist. And so I thought I can do this, just because I've absorbed so much, from the archaeological digs down in that area. I've studied the metallurgy, the academic papers, the geoarchaeology of the location. And I thought I can write this boy's story, because sometimes I just sit up on the fortress walls at Tamar at night and watch the moon come up over the mountains of Jordan, which, 3,000 years ago, it would have been the mountains of Moab and Edom. And I just imagine sitting on those walls of the fortress, how many people would have been walking through there on any given day. I say, okay, what did these people watch on TV on Wednesday nights? Of course, they didn't have early Iron Age television, but they did have campfires. They did meet together. They did talk about things. And so, especially there at a caravanserai, which was a stopping place for the caravans, where they could feed their camels and their donkeys, refresh, replenish, sell a broken down camel and buy a new one. All of that was available there. They sat around the campfires at night and they talked. And often this is how news was shared. As the caravans passed through, so did the news. And so did the storytelling. And we all know If you tell a story one time, the next person that tells it's going to embellish it just a little. And then the next person that tells that story is going to embellish it just a little. And before you know it, we've got these, fantastic stories that are being related. So I just listened to them tell their stories. I just imagined what sorts of things that they would talk about. And especially in that particular place, what would happen in a place like this that would create a story? And so that's what I tried to do. And so what I'd like to do for you today is to read a couple of chapters out of that story. Now, it's not available yet. You can't even pre-order it yet. Like I said, I've not sent in the final edited manuscript. But it's called Scorpions Ascent, and it's named after the pass between the south, the Arava Desert, and where it goes over the mountains into Judea. And the camel steps are still cut in there. You can hike the area today. You can't get a car over it anymore. It's been closed off. I don't know if you could do a dirt bike. That might be difficult, but you can hike it. And in Hebrew, it's called Ma'ale Akrabim. Ma'ale Akrabim. Ma'ale is like the going up, the ascent, the steps that go up. And then Akrabim is scorpions. And the trail is a little like a scorpion's tail. It's kind of windy to get over it. But I'm not sure if you could, Google Maps it and do a view where you could get down real close and kind of see the windiness of the area. But it's named after the Ma'ale Akrabim, or the Scorpions Ascent. And the scorpions will play a role in the story. Because this young boy, he's going to have to go on a journey. He's going to have to be like early Iron Age Indiana Jones, and he's going to have to go rescue somebody. And so he's going to take two things that I'll introduce to you here in the first couple of chapters, and some baskets of scorpions with him in this quest to help him along the way. So let me, again, I'll share with you the cover concept. Now, this may not be the final cover. The final cover may look completely different, but this is the cover concept of Scorpions Ascent. And we'll start here with chapter 1. And we'll just read a couple chapters here to give you a little overview. And so over the next few months, if I mention Scorpions Ascent, then you'll have an idea what I'm talking about, and then we can keep you updated when it's actually available for pre-order, or it actually, the actual publication date, which we should get ironed out here after Revive. I might have a better idea how long it's going to take to actually get into print. But I think it'll make a great gift, for teenagers. It's clean. It's based in the Bible, and hopefully it'll get them excited about archaeology of the Bible instead of dinosaurs. I know dinosaurs are interesting, but there's other very interesting areas of archaeology. And I'm hoping that I've woven enough of that into the text that they might become enthusiastic and maybe even volunteer at some point to go help with an archaeological dig. I think we've got some great potential Indiana Jones who could perhaps go on a better quest and could influence a very secular profession with biblical faith. If there's anybody skeptical, it's archaeologists. And you literally have to prove them wrong by digging up something that the Bible talks about. And that's the beauty of it, is because eventually, given enough time, the Bible, it is truth. It's not intended to be a history book or an archaeology book, but it is intended to be truth. And so I think we need more faith-based archaeologists who don't start out as skeptics. But here we go. This is the beginning of Scorpions Ascent. The camels groaned, yawned, and belched to the tinkle of bells, drovers' shouts, and the creaking of their heavy baggage. Only their hooves in the sand were silent. The sun's orange glow in the east prepared to slip warm fingers atop the mountains of Moab and vault into the desert sky. By noon, the sun's morning kiss would become a demonic shade, erasing every cool shadow of the caravanserai. The silver-haired boy slipped the few coins he'd earned into the leather pouch around his neck and concealed it beneath his tunic. Never let anyone see a money purse, even if your father is the steward over the king's copper mines, even if your father has a detachment of soldiers and a fortress. Tsachi had been saving coins and product samples from the caravan merchants for several years. In return for helping them load their camels and donkeys, carrying baggage, or handing girth straps to them from beneath the soft bellies of the animals in the pre-dawn darkness, they paid him with trinkets, beads, coins, and samples of spices. The drovers and merchants who needed to trade weary or lame animals remembered him. They knew that he'd helpfully point out the strongest camels and donkeys in the nearby stone holding pens of rested stock for sale or trade. They always paid something. Tsachi started helping the caravan merchants when he was 6 years old. Now that he was 12, he'd saved jars full of coin and acquired clay juglets full of various spices. His favorites were cinnamon and saffron. The angry shout of a caravan drover disrupted Tsachi's thoughts. Tsachi adjusted his turban to conceal the silver strands of hair. His peyot often worked their way out of the cloth because they were so long. He scanned the last of the caravan's sluggish marchers for the source of the shouting. The camels and donkeys were conditioned by hundreds of miles of desert sand, rocky mountains, and relentless sun to expect nothing greater than a little fodder and the shedding of their heavy burdens when the sun set. Some of the caravanserai drovers were kind, some not. All were strictly business. One of them was angry. The drover cursed again in the morning twilight. He kicked a fallen donkey, then kicked at her foal, who didn't dodge the first kick, but smartly stayed out of sandal range after that. The nursing mother didn't even try to dodge the blows. She simply lay beneath her pack, head down, muzzle to the sand, too weak or hopeless to flinch. Her foal was only a couple of weeks old, probably nursing vainly because her dam was skinny and sick. The ailing donkey could no longer carry a burden. Bilam, muttered Tsachi, approaching the enraged drover. What? Asked the drover, whirling to face him. Tsachi didn't repeat what he called him. It was worse than a curse word to an Israelite. But the nations around Israel knew who Bilam was, a legendary donkey-beating sorcerer. Ben Shimi, the soldier of the gate that morning, looked on in the gloom, but he didn't try to help. He was supposed to check all who passed through Tamar to see if they were spies looking for weaknesses in the fortress. Supposed to. Right now, he simply leaned on his spear unsympathetically. I will unpack her for you so she can stand, said Tsachi. Quit trying to work me for coins, boy, growled the drover. I want nothing, said Tsachi, but the front of your caravan is already past Givat Chatzeva. You'll never catch them if she can't rise. Not today, anyway. The man's camels were already loaded, standing ready. Tsachi let him feel the pressure of being left behind. Pressure was the best bargaining tool Tsachi had at his age. People would pay for his help if it secured a safer position in the caravan. Bandits preyed on those who lagged. She'll never stand up, said the drover. She was sick even before she foaled this miserable little camel flea. Then shall I move her burden to one of the camels? Asked Saki, before your caravan crosses the steps of the Scorpions Ascent without you? The mountains will close you in there. It's not good to be alone. Yes, you little robber, fumed the drover. I know how you caravanserai boys work. You say you charge nothing, and then after you do it, you ask for payment. Rather than answer, Saki used skilled fingers to search out the knots until he lifted the burden from the fallen donkey. When he lifted, he understood why she'd fallen. The pack was too heavy for a healthy donkey, but for a sick donkey with a nursing foal, this was pure cruelty. The man could not be a drover. Drovers knew their animals' limits. This man was a merchant. The merchant growled and smacked one of his camels with his staff until the camel grunted and bawled and folded his knees to accept the extra baggage. Saki added the burden to the kneeling camel, positioning it where it could be most easily carried. Hurry, urged the merchant, hovering over Saki. Saki could tell from the camel's pack that he was a better packer, but still he kept silent, deftly fastening the ropes. How much do you want? Asked the merchant when he finished. Nothing, answered Saki, choking back the price he really wanted. He had learned from the Edomite and Nabatean traders how to bargain. You better hurry. There's a place in the road where a winter flood washed it out. You need to catch your caravan so you'll know where to have your camels go around it. Pressure. Will you take the donkeys? Asked the merchant. That was no payment. A dying donkey whose carcass would have to be removed with her foal who would die without her milk. The merchant was offering Saki nothing but more work, a sad walk to the death wadi. Saki folded his arms and frowned, swinging his gaze from the donkey to her foal, then looking over his shoulder to the smelting furnace atop Givat Chatzeva. He shook his head. I'd have to drag them a long way to the boneyard, countered Saki. The captain will not allow animal corpses around the fortress. There are wolves and jackals in the wadi who feed on the dead animals. He doesn't want them here around the tents and livestock. I have to go now to deliver food to the workers at the Chatzeva furnace. There was a wadi along the way to the Scorpions Ascent where sick animals were disposed of. Sometimes they were simply stripped of their halters and burdens and turned loose in the desert. Sometimes the drover mercifully cut their throats so they would die within a few seconds. It was kinder than being torn to death by hyenas or jackals, which was both a terror and a painful way to die. Israelite robbers, muttered the merchant. Ben Shimi stood a little straighter at the insult, finally moving. The accusation rattled loose the words of a song in Saki's memory. So long ago, sang Saki's mother in Hebrew as he fell asleep. There was a man of the earth, a man of the sea. His father was taken by robbers, killed by robbers. The man went into the forest, went into the wolves, so long ago, so long ago. Pulling a leather pouch from inside his tunic and tugging the drawstring, the donkey beater explored in the purse with a forefinger. The donkeys and a bit of balsam. He extended his hand, and a tiny pearl of balsam lay in his palm. Saki hesitated, drawing out the seconds of being left behind, letting the urgency simmer. 2 dead donkeys, Saki reminded him. 2 pearls of balsam, offered the agitated man, sorting another nugget of resin from the pouch. Saki inclined his head. Sagul. Ben Shimi smirked at him and twirled his spear idly. At least you'll smell better than 2 dead donkeys. Saki stared at the 2 pearls of sticky, fragrant balsam. He knew the desert is not the quiet place city dwellers believe. The desert opens the ear. Caravans were bedlam even in the muted sand. Below the level of cranky camels, braying donkeys, and noisome drovers, the cargoes of metal, mineral, and cloth murmured and pushed among themselves in leather packs. Balsam was more valuable than frankincense and myrrh. Frankincense spoke of possibility. Imagine this. Frankincense hissed, like the Satan himself. Myrrh could not mute her aroma of death until some perfumer compounded it with another spice, transforming her keening death march to a dance of good harvest, feasts, stone altars, flutes, drums, and harps. But the balsam, it thrived in arid places. The most beautiful of aromas was not found in its little berries. It was in her bark. Slice open the bark, then quickly capture the bleeding sap. The tacky resin dries with a sigh into hard nuggets easily transported. Light burden, heavy profit. The tiny balsam drops sing above the camel stink. Rich, rich. Saki valued balsam. It was a precious plant, aggressively guarded by the southern peoples who cultivated in places like Sheba. His stepmother Shira would make good use of it. He sniffed the 2 pieces of resin to see if the merchant was a cheat as well as a donkey beater. No, it was real, not fake gum resin to fool a boy into dragging half-dead donkeys to a death wadi. The smell of balsam was rare to most Israelites, but Saki lived in the Tamar fortress, a stopover for the ancient caravans from the east. Its gushing oasis spring offered abundant water, and Saki enjoyed the large jujube and tamarisk trees that gave rare full shade from the sun. Scattered acacia trees in the wilderness offered an illusion of shade, but the sun's persistent arrows shot through the acacia's twisted little branches, fine needles, and coiled bean pods. The huge desert lizards, the chardons, burrowed deep into the earth beneath the acacias to shelter from the sweltering midday sun. Saki dropped the 2 resin pearls into his pouch, ignoring Ben-Shimi, which most people did. The sun had crawled over the Moabite mountains to the east, and Saki needed to walk to the Chatzeva height and ascend its flat top. His father, Nachshon, was overseeing the furnace atop the mountain. The Erev winds raged constantly atop the Giva, making it a perfect place to superheat the furnace to temperatures needed to melt the copper and iron ore from Melech Shlomo's mines. The Chatzeva furnace never required a bellows to raise its temperature, like the furnaces of Feinan or Timnah. Saki's father turned the copper and iron ore into horn-shaped ingots for ox carts to transport to Yerushalayim, Yaffo, Ashdod, Egypt, Beersheba, and even Tyre and Sidon. Armorers mixed copper with tin, an even rarer metal brought from the far north, then used it to make bronze. Saki's father always left their house long before sunup with his 2 military bodyguards to ascend the mountain in the dark or to visit the southern furnaces in Timnah. The coals of the furnace only cooled on Shabbat and during the high holy days. Each workday morning, his father stirred and arranged the coals expertly in assigned work. A master metal worker like his father was so valuable that he was guarded at all times to prevent him from being kidnapped. If Ben-Shimi had been more interested in manning his post, he'd have involved himself in the spice dealer's dilemma. He could have asked a few questions to find out how a minimally competent donkey beater made it this far in a caravan, even if the answer was just that he was a merchant and his drover fell ill and was left behind. Rival kingdoms looking for secrets to manufacturing stronger tools and weapons always sought opportunities to steal from the alliance of Egyptians and Israelites. The secret of forging newer weapons of iron drew spies from far countries. Saki never worried too much about his Abba being kidnapped for his skill, though. Tamar was one of the strongest fortresses in the south. Saki was not yet valuable to Israel's king, Melech Shlomo, but he would pass into the fires as an apprentice when he turned 13. He had no idea how to stop it. Saki hated the fires. Abba said he might let him grow an extra year before taking him on his first pilgrimage to Yerushalayim for a Chag. A pilgrimage feast marked a boy's transition to adult obligations. For now, every morning Saki carried the midday meal to the Chatzeva workers and did little jobs around the fortress. Today's job wasn't so little, but it was going from sad to worse. The fallen donkey's foal approached and nuzzled her dam's long ears, but the donkey didn't move. Abba wouldn't wonder where he was until mid-morning because he had assumed Saki found work among the departing caravan or for one of Melech Shlomo's soldiers who guarded the fortress. So what to do with these two dying donkeys? The Holy Scroll of the Torah commanded an Israelite to help a fallen donkey to its feet, but it had no clear instruction of what act of mercy to do if the donkey couldn't rise at all. Ben Shimi had stuck his spear in the stand. Now he cracked pistachio nuts, still watching, glad for some amusement. Saki walked to the fallen donkey, and her foal shied away. "Smart girl," said Saki. The scrawny foal looked like a moving dark brown bag of acacia sticks. He knelt and stroked the short mane straggling up from the dam's neck. For a few minutes, Saki just spoke to her, massaging the line of dark hair that formed a cross down the donkey's neck and spine, its crossbar across her shoulders. Hashem drew with a divine stylus the best place to fasten a donkey's burden. Saki knew donkeys liked the soft spot behind their long ears scratched. He'd seen them do some acrobatic three-legged feats to scratch there with a hind hoof like a dog. Gently at first, Saki moved the halter and rubbed behind the old girl's ears. She had scars and patches of missing hair, signs of a hard life. After a few more minutes, the donkey's ears moved, and then her muzzle lifted a few inches from the earth. "That's a girl," said Saki. He dug into his cloth shoulder bag and took out his lunch. Some flatbread his stepmother Shira cooked, a bit of goat cheese, a cluster of dates, and dried kochava leaves to make broth. Saki separated a sweet date and held it to the donkey's lips. At first, she was motionless, as if wondering whether it was a trick to make her care more about living than about simply letting her lifelight go out in this powdery sand filled with camel dung. "Go ahead, girl," said Saki. The soft gray lips nibbled at the date, working around it, testing it, and at last she took it and chewed. She worked it in her mouth for a long time, but then she dropped it to the ground, soggy and torn. This gave Saki an idea. Cringing a little at the thought of the salivary slime inside, he slipped his hand in the side of the donkey's mouth. In the soft, empty gum space between the front and back teeth, he gripped her tongue firmly and pulled it out the side of her mouth. She opened her mouth, instinctively knowing she'd bite her own tongue if she bit down. With his other hand, Saki explored the back teeth until he found it. It was a loose, abscessed tooth. The donkey pulled back when he touched the inflamed gums around it with his fingers. Saki hung on to her tongue, but with his other hand, he explored the area of the donkey's lower jaw beneath the tooth. There it was, concealed by her shaggy hair. The infection had pushed below her jaw, and a huge lump of pus protruded. Saki didn't have the right tools, but he knew who did. Melech Shlomo's soldiers had a physician who could treat both people and animals. More than once, Saki had seen the physician pull a man's tooth or a horse's with an equal lack of compassion. Maybe the physician would pull the tooth and drain the abscess, a contribution to the vital work of the fortress. Once the donkey could eat and her body was rid of infection, she'd fatten up and be fine. And that's how Saki acquired 2 donkeys and 2 pearls of balsam when he was 12. Treasures drawn from the Arava's sandy earth. So long ago, sang Saki's mother as he fell asleep. There was a man of the earth, a man of the sea. The wolves sang to the man. They taught him the ways of the earth. Then the earth returned the man to the sea, returned him to the sons of man. So long ago, so long ago. All right, so that's the first couple of chapters. You can see that there's all sorts of stuff in there. History, biblical history, animal husbandry, There'll be even more. You can see that the wolves are going to factor in this story. There's a little bit of biblical mysticism, but Saki is going to need these two donkeys to go on his quest. And so this is the story of how he acquired those donkeys. And eventually, how he's going to solve the problem of not being apprenticed to the smelting fires, which he hates. I think you'll like the story. Even if you've never been down in that area of Israel, my hope is once you read the story, you will feel like you have been there. And so maybe some of my students who have gone with me to Israel and stayed there at the Tamar Fortress, they can tell me whether I've done a good job of recreating the place for people who have never been there or not. But I'm really excited about it. It's not going to be a long book. It's about 60,000 words, which is about right for young adult reading level. But if it does well, and I'm hoping it does, then, like I said, I think we have the potential to create a series and fill in that missing place, I think, for young men. You know, like I said, there's lots of literature out there for the young ladies written by women and with primarily female readers. But I think this will be great. And of course, there's going to be lots more interesting characters introduced after this introduction to Saki. And by the way, his name Saki comes from Sechak in Hebrew, which means bright, white, and shining. And that'll be part of the mystery to solve. Like, why does this 12-year-old boy already have hair that's going gray or silver? And it's going to go back to this lullaby that his mother sang to him and his brother. Of course, his mother's dead, and now he has a stepmother. And so part of the quest, he'll uncover a little bit of the mystery about the silver hair. Why did he go silver? And I actually modeled that on somebody I went to school with. As a brother and sister. And their mother had very black hair, and their father had fiery red hair. And both my friend and her little brother were going gray by the time they were in high school. Both of them. And I just filed that one away for another day. And I thought, well, this will be a great thing, because it can happen, you know, in the natural realm, but there might also be some spiritual significance for this kid and his little brother, some mystery to solve about this lullaby. And so in the educator's manual, I'm hoping to include lessons, like I say, on archaeology, metallurgy, the animals of the Arabah, the plants of the Arabah, information about ancient caravanserais, caravans, the spice route. The Queen of Sheba will be in the story. And of course, King Solomon. And the conflict, again, with the Edomites, the Amalekites, those sorts of things, those will be included. And so, yeah. But if you're not subscribed to our newsletter, typically it does include some teaching for that week. When I found a good book, I won't just put a book in there, you know, to have a book in there, but if I find a good book, and it might be academic, it might be fiction, might be kids, might be adults, might be reference, I'll put that in there. There will be news each week about the orphanages. And, you know, if we have upcoming conferences or that sort of thing, that'll be in there, along with information on how to register for that. When we have tours, we did have to cancel the 2024 because of the war. But we are back on track. We're trying to put together the 2025 Sukkot tour. So when that's ready to load, of course, we'll put the tours in there. But if that interests you, like I said, we don't want to send anything to your box that just becomes a bigger hassle in your day. I understand. uh, if you don't need a pen pal, you don't need a pen pal, and we don't want to be the pen pal that you don't need today. But if that sort of thing about the creation gospel interests you, we'll have that information in there along with new classes. Workbook 1 classes, Keisha Gallagher and Michelle Schaff coordinate those. So if you want to get on that waiting list, if there's new classes coming up, we'll post that. Sometimes Keisha will do workbook 2 or workbook 4 online classes on Zoom. And we try to get that posted for you so you can interact. Just anything that pertains, and usually, sometimes I'm not correct, but if there's going to be a live stream on Shabbat, I'll put that in there and what time, because sometimes if I'm teaching at our congregation or somewhere else, it'll modify the time. Instead of the usual 4 p.m. Eastern, it might be at a different time. And so I'll try to keep you updated on that. I do make mistakes every now and then. But that's always a good place to look if you don't use Facebook, and some people don't, and I don't blame you. It's a good reference, if you're looking for something in particular. Anything else that I need to share with you since I won't see you next week? That should probably do it. Don't forget that we're in the 3 weeks. We're in the straits between the fasts of the 4th and the 5th month. This is a red flag area. This is a danger zone. This spans the time between the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And so also, the time of the golden calf, the time of the evil report of the 10 spies during this window, the time that the abomination that causes desolation was put into place. All these dangerous times fall during this period right here. And we're also in the hour of transgression. If you studied our lessons on the hours, I think the title was the hours, not even the angels know, but it sees each month as a particular hour, because an hour is not always 24 hours in the Bible. Sometimes it's just a particular time period. And so this particular month is transgression, associated with transgression. And that's why we need to guard our hearts and keep our eyes open if so many historically bad things have happened during this time period. But the good thing to remember is, if you did that study with us, you saw how we broke down the 12 months, both starting with Nisan is the first of the months, the Passover month is the first of the months, and then starting also side by side with Tishrei, the 7th month, as the first. It's just used for a different calendar purposes, but each of those months has a counterpart when you put that side by side. And so the cool thing about the 4th month is that its counterpart, I believe, is Tevet. And the essence of Tevet is Tov, or good. And so again, and there's another fast in that month. So there's always the possibility of great good coming out of our tests and our trials when we come out on the other side. And so, yes, there will be a lot of death and threat of death, and deathly behavior associated with this particular month. That's why you have the fast during this month. That's why you have the fast and Av to bookend, with those 3 weeks, those straits, so that you are reminded that, yes, this is danger zone, but we can pray through it. We can remember what Moses told us. He's not leaving forever. Yeshua has not left forever. He is going to return, and there will be an accounting. And so when he returns, we want to be able to stand. And when I teach the Torah portion next Shabbat, we'll get some more details about standing beside your offering. What will you stand beside when Yeshua returns? Because it may be that's your last stand. Instead of the beginning. You know, we don't want to die falling short. We want to, would advance be the right word? We want to progress. Even eternity, we want to continue from glory to glory. So, all right. I'll let you go. And you say, guard your heart, but look forward to good things. Good things coming for those who believe, right? All right, love you. See you next time.